بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على عبد الله ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. A few days ago, as part of my regular Friday class, Friday Night Reflections, I did a class on the topic of marital discord and a comprehensive guide to solving problems in a marriage. And when I did that, alhamdulillah, we covered 17 points that can really help people to work through the issues that they might experience. And I wanted to make a very short follow-up video because there were a few points that I didn't include that I really did want to include. And so what I'm going to do, inshallah, is just mention perhaps 2 or 3 points in this video as an add-on to the video that we made earlier on in the week. So my very first point is this. I spoke about the point in which I said, look at yourself first. And before anyone else, you need to consider yourself and you need to look at yourself. And before you accuse and point the finger, you need to ask yourself about what you might have done. But there's a point related to that I wanted to mention to make it really, really clear. And that point is, and I'm going to give it the title, I'm going to give it the name, that there's not only one person at fault. In any situation, and I can honestly say from all of the marriages I've dealt with and all of the counseling and the things that have come my way, I can honestly say that I can't remember a case where the fault has been completely with one person. And why I'm making this point instead of just sufficing with that point that we made earlier with look at yourself first is because there's certain people come to marriage counseling or come to, sitting to solve problems in a marriage, and their angle or their attitude that they come with is that I'm coming because my husband is really bad, or I'm coming because my wife is really bad. And we really need to move away from that. And we need to be honest with ourselves and start by saying there's not one person at fault. At the same time, that doesn't mean that everyone's faults are equal. Because even the attitude of coming and just saying, I don't have any faults, but the other person does, it doesn't help. The fact that you're sitting in a counseling session or you're watching these videos trying to solve problems tells me that you want to solve the marriage, you want to get it started again, and you want to, inshallah ta'ala, fix things. And if that's the case, it has to be done with humility. There has to be that humility to come and say, okay, maybe the two are not equal, but there is something on both sides. My next point, and this is a really, really important one, and a one that I really wanted to bring up, and subhanAllah, the time and all the points we made, and it got lost somewhere along the way. Don't bring up the past. Okay, that's the first part. But do understand why the past is being brought up. So this is a little bit of a tough one. Don't bring up the past. So many couples in marriage counseling bring up the past and don't deal with the present. It's all about, 5 years ago he did this, and 4 years ago he did this, and 3 years ago he did this, and 10 years ago he did this, and so on. Ideally, as much as possible, we don't want to bring up the past. This is part of the point that we made about forgiving and overlooking and not expecting 100%. But more than that, it's about not dwelling and living in the past. Because if the past wasn't a good marriage, and you sit together trying to solve the problem, and you bring up the past again and again and again, then in reality, you're never going to escape that area or that phase of being in a bad marriage, because you're living inside of that bad marriage. However, there's a counterpoint to that. Understand why your spouse is bringing up the past. There are 2 real reasons why a spouse brings up the past. I think broadly, we can say there are 2 real reasons. Either the behavior hasn't stopped, or they haven't had closure. They don't feel closure. So the behavior hasn't stopped. That's an easy one. So they say, 5 years ago, my husband did this. and you look at the situation and really right now he's doing pretty much the same thing, or it's likely that he will do the same thing again and again and again. The problem hasn't been solved. But you get another set of cases where the lady comes, and I'm just giving the example of the lady, it could be from the man's side, but the lady comes and she says that my husband 10 years ago did this. And I say, okay, did you work through it? We worked through it. He apologized, but I can't let it go. Has he stopped that behavior? Yeah, to be fair to him, he stopped. So what does that mean? What that really means is that that lady doesn't have closure. She doesn't feel like the issue has been completely settled, maybe because the behavior following that hasn't been good enough to erase it in her mind, or she doesn't feel like she's been able to move on from it, but ultimately understand the problem. The problem is not what happened 10 years ago. If we don't talk about the past, we say the problem is that I don't feel satisfied, or I don't feel that I have closure about a problem that happened 10 years ago. Now you're not talking about the past, you're talking about the here and now, the present, right now. Right now, my problem is not that he did something 10 years ago. My problem is that I don't feel that I have got enough of an emotional response. I don't feel like I have enough of the way that he's behaving, or he's continued to behave. I don't feel maybe like I've had a chance to talk about it enough, or that I've had a chance to really get the issue solved. And so it's always been just bubbling under the surface, and yet again, it keeps coming out. Now, in reality, that actually changes the situation a little bit, from being a problem that was only from the guy to being what is really a shared problem. It was the guy's fault that he did something wrong 10 years ago, but it's also, not going to say the fault of the lady, but it's still within her domain. It's on her side that she's not able to move over that. And that's not necessarily something he might have to do, although he might have to take some actions to correct that. He might have to change his ways. He might have to be nicer and all these other things. But on the other side, it's about looking at what she needs to be able to really overcome and really feel like the issue is closed and done with. And my next and final point, and it's a pretty obvious one, but it's one that's worth mentioning. And it's one that it was mentioned to me after the class that, we thought you perhaps could have mentioned this one. And that is, treat your spouse as you would wish to be treated. Now, that sounds fairly obvious, and it's a very Islamic principle. As you treat others, you will be treated. It's a very Islamic principle and quite a common thing that we hear. But I wanted to take a really practical example of that. So let's look at the example of a husband who complains that his wife isn't maybe giving him enough attention, isn't really maybe making enough of an effort. That's usually the word that we use. Oh, my wife doesn't make an effort with me. She doesn't maybe dress up for me. When she goes out with her friends, she takes care of her clothes, she takes care of how she looks. But when she's with me, it's just, basic household living, and I don't feel there's any spark in the marriage and stuff like that. Often we would turn around and say, do you do the same for your wife? Do you make that same effort? Do you really go to that effort that when you come home, you really look at how you look and you look at your best and you take care of yourself? Or are you at the stage where you're the exact same as she is? When you go out with your friends, you get dressed up, your new clothes come on, the perfume comes out, you really make sure you look your best. But when you come home, you're sprawled all over the sofa in your sleeping clothes or whatever. So it is important when we say treat your spouse as you would wish to be treated, is a real practical example that if you are making certain demands or certain complaints about your spouse and you feel that you're not getting from them what you should be, you also need to look at, in reverse, are you giving that same thing to your spouse? Because ultimately, you have to treat people as you would wish to be treated. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of other points that I will remember and think about over the coming days and weeks. Probably what I'm going to do, instead of making more and more add-on videos, I'll probably collect them together, inshallah ta'ala, and possibly do another Friday night lecture on the same topic, based on feedback from the people who attended the classes, and indeed from the people who watch the videos, inshallah ta'ala. What we'll probably do is gather together a few more points and maybe make another episode of this topic, because it's certainly a huge topic. But I really just went through my notes and my recollections of marriage counseling and some of the things that I've come across helping people with their marriages, and tried to kind of distill it into a single video. There were a few points that missed that video, and I thought, inshallah, it's well worth just putting them on as an add-on while people are watching. And so inshallah ta'ala, we leave you with that. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.